Today is Thursday, June 1st, 2023. We are in the seventh Thursday of Pascha, and we're reading through the Orthodox Bible calendar. So today is Acts of the Apostles 25:13 through 19, and the Gospel of John 16:23 through 33. And I have some highlights here on the screen that I will consider today. So in Acts it says, "When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed." Okay, so somebody's on trial, and these are the evils that these are the things that are not as evil as he supposed. They had certain points of dispute with him about their own superstition and about one Jesus, who was dead, but who Paul asserted to be alive. So, of course, we've talked in the previous couple of days about the testimony of the Lord, which is in the Christian symbol system. The Lord is given, at least in one aspect, the referent of Jesus of Nazareth. So when Paul testifies about the Lord, he does so at least in one aspect referring to the historical person of Jesus. And so here he is, somebody's on trial for what they said about Jesus, who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. So this references the resurrection of Jesus. And we saw in a previous video that the psychological referent of the linguistic assertion, which also has a conceptual referent that Jesus is risen or resurrected, those words point to images in the mind and also human beings in history. The images in the mind to which they refer we've considered the possibility that their referent is the ontological ground of the personality, which in certain modes of religious experience is experienced to be a body without extension in matter, but extension in spiritual substance, or perhaps we might say in energy. Okay, so Paul is on trial for what he says with regard to the resurrection of the Lord. In particular, if we think of this macrocosmically, we would have to consider both aspects, namely the spiritual or metaphysical referent and also the physical corporeal referent, that is, Jesus. So in the gospel reading, Jesus, the Lord, is saying to his disciples, "I am leaving the world and going to the Father." He also says, "I am not alone, for the Father is with me." My reading of this is that on the one hand, in death, one meets the Father. On the other, it is Jesus who has access to the Father in the world. So there's a few questions for today. In Acts, let's return to Acts and the manner in which the concept of the Lord has both a physical, historical, and psychological, ahistorical referent. I suppose you may say that it is historical in its psychological aspect to the extent that the human being is a historical being for whom the existence of the psychological referent depends. That is, you cannot have a psychological referent without a psychological being. So that, and we may then expand this to say there are three referents of the Lord. One is physical, historical. The second is psychological, ahistorical. The third might be eternal. And so the idea would be that there is some element with two aspects in the created world, one element in the uncreated world that is the a priori, that is the ontological trinity. So now we've got three aspects. And what this commentary is going to suggest is that the primary referent of the theological concept of Lord is the psychological. Only from the psychological basis can one find its projection in the outer world, that is, in the physical historical, and in the eternal. For man cannot know the eternal. And so, of course, there is an implication here that I am forced to expound on, which is that the divinity of Christ is a divinity that is projected onto him. And that the religion of Christianity is based on a projection. It's a projection of the inner Lord onto a historical man who serves as an outer image into which the hooks of projection can take hold. Okay. Let's see what else there is here. Is the person of the historical Jesus sufficient basis for total reconciliation? So, if the outer image of Christ, and by image, I'm actually, what I mean to say is the body of Jesus, the Christ of Nazareth, if that Christ were fully divine, why is it that there is not reconciliation between those who claim to be in his church? Put it more concretely, is the historical person of Jesus sufficient for total reconciliation between those who follow him? The answer is no. So Jesus the Christ was insufficient to reconcile man to God and man to men. The implication is that because man is not reconciled to himself or other men, that there is something that will intervene in the course of time that does so. If the true teleology of the human species is their reconciliation to one another, to the world, and to God, then there is something who is not the historical Jesus that will do so. And that is the second person of the Trinity, which is expressed in and through someone other than the person of Jesus of Nazareth. To think of this metaphysically, in the history of the world, there was a point in time where there was a heightened incarnation of the second person of the Trinity, the incarnation of which is ongoing, and the correlation of which between man, Jesus, and Christ as the second or Son of God, the similarity between those two is in their mutual existence as projection of the inner man.